Start with the numbers. There clearly is, in fact, a correlation between the timing of the protest and the surge in infection rates and new cases that followed days later. But correlations don't always mean that there's causation, that one is causing the other. And when you look more closely at the data and the research on top of that, and state contact tracing here and elsewhere, and national research, it all appears to be leading to something else.
And then when the protests happen, you have massive demonstrations of people.
Health experts feared the mass protests that rolled through Florida and across the nation could trigger an explosion of COVID-19. And now that Florida and some other states have an explosion in new cases and infection rates, particularly among young adults, many of you assume the mass protest fed the spike. And with that, many of you have asked us why we're not drawing that connection in our coverage. Well, the reason is that the data and the research show the explosion of cases and positive test rates are not due to the protests. In citing the data, Governor DeSantis has repeatedly dismissed the protests as a source for the COVID spike in Florida, and his experts can find no evidence of a link.
I certainly have not had my Department of Health substantiate that the protests are driving the figures with the younger people.
The state is contact tracing, figuring out where people who tested positive have been. And the state's health experts are finding a clear pattern that leads not to outdoor protest, but indoors to places where young adults go to party.
The sick individuals have all stated that they've been around a pub, a bar, an event.
The state says the Knights Pub in the Orlando area is one example. State agents say it violated social distancing orders. Then more than 40 customers and staff tested positive before the state suspended its alcohol license.
And you pack huge numbers of people indoors that are very close, you're creating an environment that you're going to see more spread.
Meanwhile, national research also found no evidence that cases and infection rates jumped due to the protests. In fact, in parts of the country that saw some of the largest protests, per capita cases and infection rates dropped. A National Bureau of Economic Research study found that protests discouraged many other people from going out to places that could have spread the virus, effectively offsetting the risk of increased transmission within the protest crowds. While the research notes it's possible the protests could have caused an increase of spread among some who attended, it determined that it had little effect on the spread of the pandemic across the nation. And so, again, contact tracing and the data points, they are continuing to lead more specifically to crowded indoor gatherings, point by point. And Arizona and Florida, Texas, not far behind, they continue to lead the nation in the spikes we're seeing in new cases and the positivity rate, Cynthia, as well.
Okay, some of the research that we've heard also says that the virus is susceptible to sunlight and heat. We got plenty of that in Florida, Arizona too. So how do the experts explain that?
And Texas, too, right? It's the south and the western parts of the country, the warmest, hottest places that receive most of the sunlight. So what's happening there? Yes, sunlight, according to research, does render exposure to it for 30 minutes or more, renders most of the virus inactive. But what happens when you have direct sunlight that may render it inactive? It's also very unpleasant as a place to congregate for people. So if you're looking to get together somewhere, you may be more apt in Arizona and Florida to pack indoors or go to an indoor place where air is circulating as opposed to staying outdoors compared to perhaps other states that are not as hot. That is one possible correlation that scientists are looking into as we speak.
Well, with a heat index of 110 today, yeah, we kind of get that, don't we? It is Florida in the summertime. Thank you so much,
You tend
Craig.
to go indoors rather than outdoors.
Exactly. That's where the AC is. Thank you, Craig.